Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. On this podcast, we are talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I'm your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is A&N Profiles. Today I'm here with Jeffrey Brown. He serves as the Associate Secretary of the Ministerial Association of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. That felt like a mouthful.
It is a mouthful.
Associate Secretary of the Ministerial Association. So now, the Ministerial Association, this is really about your life, but before we get there, what's the difference between an association and a department?
Well, association is supposed to have a broader function in terms of affecting all departments. We are really servants for all of the departments, and there are pastors especially present in almost all the departments of the General Conference. And so we are really servants. That's why we call secretaries. And our leader really is Elder Wilson, is the General Conference president. And so we are all called secretaries or associate secretaries.
I did not know. I mean, I knew that we had associations. I knew we had departments, but you don't always understand it. Like, we have so much nomenclature in our church, and it's like we don't necessarily know what all the differences are. But you serve currently as one of the editors for Ministry magazine, correct? Which is an incredible periodical for ministers, but not just Adventists.
That's correct.
So I'm actually going to let you give a little plug. So normally we just talk about people's lives, but I actually want to give a plug. Explain the work of Ministry magazine and why it reaches so much further than even our own pastors.
Well, I like the fact that it does, because so many of our periodicals, so many of our ministries are in-house, or they are to serve Adventists. But this particular one, Ministry magazine, as you said, every other month, so it comes out monthly, but every other month it actually goes to pastors of many denominations, those who request it, and even if we hear of a pastor in a certain area, if a minister has a colleague that would like the magazine, we do a complimentary subscription. We call the program PREACH, P-R-E-A-C-H, Project to Reach Every Active Clergy Home. And so that's what we do, because we believe that the clergy are shepherds who have a jurisdiction over so many sheep, that if we can reach the clergy with the three angels' messages, then they in turn can reach their members. And so it's really effective to be able, and necessary, to be able to reach out beyond just Seventh-day Adventist pastors.
One last thing. I want to talk about how much I appreciate it. So I actually read it every single month. But what I appreciate is that you don't just, it's not fluff. There's not fluff. This is deep. It's really well written. You tackle hard to tackle subjects. You tackle innovation. You did an issue recently on AI.
Yes, we did.
You're keeping our pastors up to date. You're helping them. It's almost like further education. Every issue is almost like being able to go to college a little bit and kind of get a refresher course. It's our continuing education.
It is continuing education, and it's helping to keep the pastors not just stimulated but alive in their ministry. If we think about the COVID period, when it was fruit basket upset basically, and pastors were discouraged a lot of the time and had to be innovative in ways they hadn't before. And our job is to keep the pastors alive, who will keep in turn the members alive. So pastoral care, not just continuing education, but pastoral care, pastoral nurture, pastoral support. We do have magazines from our department that address the elders, deacons, and deaconesses, as well as a magazine called Stronger Together that addresses the clergy families. But this one in particular is directly for the pastor, to keep him or her alive.
I love it. I love it. I had to give a little plug mostly because I like reading it myself. So I was like, we're going to, since I control this podcast, I get to plug whatever I want to plug when I want to. So that one, was on my list of plugs. So let's actually start off, though, with getting to know who you are. Because, maybe people have seen you. Maybe they watched General Conference session and they saw your face up there. But often we don't actually know who the people are, whose faces that we see or whose name is on a byline in a magazine. So, Jeffrey, where were you born? And tell me about your parents.
I was born in Birmingham, England, of Jamaican parents. They came to England, I suppose, to seek a better life. They met in England, so they didn't come as a married couple. But back then in the 50s, it was a time when Britain, who supposedly had won the war against Germany, they had their buildings, their industries torn down because of the war, and they appealed to their former colonies, come on over to help us. And so the West Indians came to England by invitation. But many times the politicians did not tell the ordinary people of England that you're going to be getting some new neighbors that may not look like you. And so unfortunately, there was a friction. And I would say my parents, they did a very good job in shielding us growing up from a lot of the racial tensions that were really happening all around us.
When your parents came over from Jamaica, were they both Adventist? Did they become Adventist there, or do they always have an Adventist roots? What is your family's history within Adventism?
Yes, they were not Adventists, and they came over, and my grandmother, my dad's mother, was a Seventh-day Adventist, so we grew up in the Baptist church. My mother was a Baptist, and my mother is a Baptist today.
Okay.
And she was not happy when I decided to become a Seventh-day Adventist, because I was a prominent member of the Baptist church as a young person. They have something called the Boys Brigade. I heard you speak with one of the members about the Pathfinders. But
Hi, Busi Kamala.
Yes, we have the Boys Brigade in the Baptist church, in the Methodist, other churches as well. But it's a similar thing. And my mother, she said to me, Jeff, before you join the Seventh-day Adventist Church, please go and speak to our pastor, Reverend Davis. And so the seed was sown by my grandmother. She came over to live with us.
What age are you at when all this is happening?
I would be around the age of 15.
Okay.
And my grandmother, she would take us to church on a Saturday. And of course, we would go to the Baptist church on Sunday. And one day my grand said, Jeff, you have to make a choice. And I didn't realize that I had to make a choice. I was enjoying...
You're like, I like them both.
Both. I would go to the Baptist Christmas party on Saturday and the Adventist Christmas party on Sunday. I thought it was a pretty good deal that I was in. But she said, you have to make a choice. And definitely the Adventist doctrines made a lot of sense. It's only that I enjoyed the fellowship of the Baptist church, and that was my dilemma.
So you said that you actually were very involved in the Baptist church. So like your mom is bringing you up. It sounds like she was very faithful Baptist. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like foundationally scripture always mattered.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes we have this thing like, oh, if you're Adventist, you have this great foundation. Actually, many churches, many parents, if they are from, no matter what denomination they are part of, they can lay a really beautiful biblical foundation for their children. Mm-hmm. It's not just Adventist parents who do this.
True.
Would you say that your mom did that for you? Was she trying to help you, create good morals and values and have a spiritual foundation? How was that in your family?
Yeah, I would say that she certainly provided that. I think for myself, I was very moral. I think I was too moral. I think I thought of myself as as a good person, thank you very much. And
You're welcome.
and so when truth or new truths were presented, I think there's a view of, why does this really matter? Because we are good Christians. And being in Britain, we often think that's a Christian country. The school I went to, which was a grammar school, this idea of Christian education actually is very interesting. We don't think of it in England the same way you all think of it here, because we think that we are Christian. The country's so the education, we don't need to have the adjective before the word education. So I would go to church every day for assembly. There was a church on the corner of our school, and we were not in a Christian school. So we went to church more than the Adventists. And so what I'm saying there is we thought of ourselves as Christians, and the idea of evangelizing is kind of strange. Why would you want to evangelize me? I'm already
A Christian.
I'm already a Christian. But the Adventists, they showed me these new truths in their Bible classes that I was attending. I didn't realize I was in a baptismal class. I just thought it was a Bible class.
It's a Bible study.
Yeah, kind of deceptive.
With an end goal.
Yes, and so when it ended, when we finished the series, the elder there of the class, he said, "Well, are we ready to be baptized?" And this was a great shock to me. But I went to see my mother, and she said, "Please talk to Reverend Davis." So I did. And I wanted Reverend Davis to talk me out of joining the Adventists.
So how did that conversation go?
Well, I said, "Reverend Davis, I have 3 questions. These are 3 things that the Adventists are saying that kind of concern me, and I would like your response." He said, "Sure." So I said, "Well, the first thing they are saying is that the 7th day is the Sabbath. That's what they say. Well, they show it from the Bible. What do you have to say about that?" And Reverend Davis said, "Well, the 7th day is the Sabbath." I said, "But Reverend, we don't, that's not what we observe." He said, "Yes." He said, "We observe the first day of the week because Jesus rose. But the 7th day is the Sabbath." So I said, okay. He wasn't doing too well in my mind, but I went to the second question. I said, "Reverend Davis, the Seventh-day Adventists, they speak about stewardship, and not just one day in 7, but a 10th of our income to give to the Lord." I said, "What do you think about that?" He said, "Well, the Bible does say we should give a 10th to the Lord." I said, "But Reverend, we don't do that in our church." He said, "No, we don't do it because if I were to announce that, we wouldn't have any members left." So I said to myself, "Oh my, this is not going the way I had hoped." Yeah. I said, "Reverend, I have one last question. The Seventh-day Adventists teach that God is particular. God has a standard, and he expects us to obey it. What do you think about that?" And Reverend Davis said, "Well, God wants us to do our best, but I don't think he's particular. But if there was one of the studies, Alyssa, that really impressed me, it was when they talked about Uzzah and how the Ark of the Covenant was tilting, and the command was given that no one should touch the Ark of the Covenant. But there on the card, as it was tilting, Uzzah stretched out his hand and to steady the Ark, and he touched it, and he perished. And that had riveted my mind that God was indeed particular. He had a standard, and it wasn't about whether you felt it or not. It was, this is what God said. And so when Reverend Davis said that, I knew then that we had to part company and go our separate ways. And the church still loved me. I mean, it's incredible. I decided to go to Newbold, and they wrote in the church, the Baptist church paper, Jeff is going to a theological school. Like,
they're still proud of you.
Yeah.
You're still their boy.
And then I went as a student missionary, and they said, Jeff has gone to Ghana. And so they didn't really let me go as such.
What does that, how did that make you feel? Because, we often think, it's like we leave another church and whatever. Does it still feel kind of like they're kind of like it was still like your family?
Yeah, and it's interesting, Alyssa, that I've been called here to the General Conference, and in the ministerial department, I've been placed in charge of the Preach Project to reach clergy of other faiths, because I do feel I have an affinity with those of other faiths as I came from them, and I was not wounded, I was not hurt, I was not.
You were loved.
I was loved, and I would find it hard to speak, a negative word about them as persons, but of course, doctrinally, was where I decided to make the choice.
What makes a 15-year-old kid decide that this even matters in life? I mean, you're a 15-year-old kid, and I mean, even if my grandma had said something like, maybe you just don't care. Like, why, what do you think made your heart so sensitive to even worrying about this? And then going to, like, I wouldn't have want to made my mom unhappy. Like, you could have just played this like line. What was it that at 15 years of age made you determine that this matters?
Yeah, I don't really know. I think that my grandmother was really a wonderful Christian, as well as my mother was a wonderful Christian. But my grandmother, she lived it. The Adventists, they took this Christianity very seriously. When we would go to the Adventist Church, of course, this is the West Indian British Church. That it's not a 2-hour event, and so she would pack up crackers and lunch, and when you went to that Adventist church in the morning, don't think about returning home until sunset, because we would go there, and then there was an afternoon program, and I saw how their faith was their whole life, and it really impressed me that these individuals are very serious. My uncles will say that I was always, as I mentioned, moral and religious, and they said as a child, when it came to grace, they would say parson. That's what they would actually refer me as, a parson. Well, we would say, I guess, pastor today, but they said, parson, say the grace. And so I did have a certain bent, I guess, even from a young age. I didn't encourage it. I fought against, becoming a pastor, but it seemed that I was destined to go that direction.
So let's talk a little bit about this whole adventure of becoming an Adventist a little bit. So you mentioned something that I have appreciated about West Indian culture. I've attended a few churches in my life, and it's this belief. I don't know if belief is the right word, but I'm just going to explain it's this experience. Sabbath is a day of community and fellowship. And you're right. It's like it's a whole day thing. It's not like let's barely drag ourselves into Sabbath school. Let's leave while the last song is singing in church and then go home and take a nap or, do what we want to do kind of a thing. And then, look, Sabbath's over. We can go do what we want to do. Right? Like, it's this beautiful experiential version of Sabbath that I feel like in many cultures we miss completely. How do you feel that helped shape your view of Sabbath and the Adventist Church?
Yeah, well, you are correct. This culture, this Caribbean culture that I grew up in there, in terms of the Adventist Church, it was interesting because the Baptist Church, we were one of the few blacks who were in that church. It was a English, we would say, English church, it's almost Church of England, and fairly formal, friendly, but fairly formal, and the Adventist church, at least the one I attended, the Caribbean Adventist churches, they were quite dynamic and they were quite expressive, loud amens, even though in those days the pastors were white. And the pastors were white because when the Caribbeans came to England, of course, pastors couldn't just come to England and they had to be called. And so we had white pastors. So the sermons were, fairly, we would say fairly low key. They were not.
That's a very fair, accurate assessment.
But the singing was very expressive, and so on and so forth. And as you said, they would have afternoon programs, which I think some churches today have lost that.
We have.
But the afternoon program was critical because that's where you discussed movie going, dating, music. What music is, and those were the forums for you to hammer out. Then you would do drama and plays and skits, and play music. Obviously, in divine worship, it was only the best music, but AYS or MV as it was called back then, even the fledgling musician could get an opportunity to be involved. So I would use the expression to describe the Caribbean British Church as all in. You were all in. It was not just a part of your life. It was, this Adventism
it's who you are,
was your life.
Core.
Yeah, and my grandmother, she would take us out selling magazine. We were not Adventists. It was Sunday. She said, "Come on, everyone." 5 of us children. "Come on now," and we would go and sell these We're not even Adventists. We would go to sell the Adventist magazine, and she had a way of spinning it, just like the Bible class people say. So she said, "I'm helping you to have a savings account." and so this is what she said, and we had our little piggy banks, and indeed we were earning money, and so that was a subtle way of of getting us involved. Very ingenious.
It's
Grandmother
like beginner
was.
colporteuring. It's like colporteuring 101. Grandparents making us door to door.
And grandmother, she's her shadow, her influence. She went back to Jamaica, but her shadow, her influence stayed with us, and she only passed away in 2015, not long ago, during General Conference session, San Antonio. We got word that she had passed away at the age of 103.
Oh, wow.
So I was blessed to have her influence. It was just after GC session, by the way, that I was called to the General Conference, and so she missed that. Yeah, she never got to hear that. It was 2016 they called me, and she passed in 2015. But definitely, I am what I am today because of Gran, as we call her, Gran.
I love it. So you went to Newbold.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about your experience. I mean, it's different. It's an Adventist school. Did you know you were going to go there to be a pastor?
No.
What were you going to be?
And that is such a perceptive question, because I was going to go to a state school, university originally, and study social work. My mother was a social worker. In fact, she was a professor of social work. And so I said, well, I like that. And I like the helping aspect. So I'll go and study social work and do the 4-year program that has a year, they call it a sandwich year, when you go into the industry or you go into the field and you work to help people. I said, that's what I want to do. And then I became an Adventist and heard about Newbold College. And I didn't know anything except that you're supposed to, as an Adventist, go to Newbold.
Well, obviously, that's what Adventists are supposed to do,
yes.
right?
And so I said, well,
at least in England.
And they had a weekend called Meet Newbold Weekend, where you could go and see what it's like. And I went there, and to me, I know some may say it's naive, but to me it was like a little heaven on earth. There were fellow Christians, fellow Adventists there, and I remember when I did join or enroll and become a student, I said to my family back home, the cafeteria, I mean, it's, you don't have to pick around. It's all stuff we can eat. It's all stuff we can eat. And I thought, you see, I had to cook my own meals once I became a vegetarian, an Adventist and a vegetarian in our home. And so...
Are you the only sibling who became an Adventist?
Yes, I was the only one of the 5 became an Adventist. But after me, my sister Anne, she also became a Seventh-day Adventist. And later, she also came to Newbold. And in many respects, she followed in my... She studied religion. She followed in my... She went as a missionary. In many respects, she followed my footsteps. And so I certainly would have to say I loved my time at Newbold. We were the first big group of what we call Black British who went there. So we did create a bit of a splash. It was a little different for them.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to actually explore this a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
When we kind of started as a church, it's like we had all these people in North America, and then it kind of spread, but you kind of are still in our own areas. So we've maybe contextualized it, and the culture kind of also plays a part in why your worship style is maybe different than our worship style, in the Caribbean versus America or whatever. But now here you are in a country that it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel the relationship was being a Black Caribbean descent person coming into Newbold, which was a Englishman's kind of a school?
Yes.
Were there challenges? Were there some ways that you saw God working on people's hearts and how we were able to come together in a place of unity? What was that like?
Yeah, I think there were some challenges in terms of traditions, that Newbold had historically. I do have to say, though, that I felt fully accepted, fully welcomed, fully embraced. I think sometimes as time goes on and numbers increase, that's when people feel threatened. And it didn't happen so much in my time there as a student, but I heard later on people did feel some measure of discomfort, and Newbold took some steps, to address these. I know myself that when I studied at Andrews and was finishing and so on and so forth, that there were some demands even from students for Black representation on the faculty level. I remember saying to my friends who had been at Newbold with me, one of us needs to get their doctorate and go back and teach at Newbold, because we didn't have any Black teachers. And, as the Lord has it, sometimes the one who says it is the one that it happens to. And so I was called I was the first Black theology teacher.
So I'm going to ask a question, because I want this to, I feel like we should be able to talk about topics. We often try to skirt on. Why does it matter to have equal representation. I mean, I believe it does, but I want to hear, why does this matter? Because, we hear like, oh, we should just want the best, but, oh, we know it matters. Like, why in your mind, why does it help the college as a whole to have this beautiful representation of everybody?
Yeah, I think the diversity is certainly a positive thing. I know for we Black British, we were what we call first generation Black British. So we were born in England, and we were the first ones in those 50s and 60s. And so our role models were, I suppose you'd have the African American, you would hear about people from Motown, the Detroit area, and so on and so forth. But we didn't have any, quote, stars in England, really. We didn't have any football stars. We didn't have any music stars necessarily. But we did have individuals who were Jamaican or Trinidadian or Guyanese, from the Caribbean. But in terms of British and Black British, it was an interesting time. Imagine nobody before you. Nobody's in that situation before you. So it's important to have people like you in order for you to see where you can go and what you can become. And so it's important to have diversity, all around you. And so when I came to teach at Newbold, then the young Black British students could see that, well,
I can go and get a doctorate. I can become a teacher. I can become an administrator.
And the Seventh-day Adventist Church will embrace you.
I think that is so vital. Something else that I often see too is that it brings a new perspective. I'm a woman. I know we're surprised by that. Me being a woman offers a different perspective.
That's correct.
When I'm in a meeting with mostly men. And just when we think about things in the terms of diversity, it's not just because we need representation. It's actually because it makes us better.
It does.
It helps us to be able to see things from different perspectives. It helps us to be able to broaden our worldviews and our understanding. And it does make a difference to those people who are like us, who have never seen that, but have never felt that they could do something. And just like Christ, we want to empower everyone to serve their calling, to serve their purpose.
That's correct.
And it's important for them to see their face in someone else's.
It is. And it's a wonderful thing when we have this diversity, and we can learn from each other, because we all have blind spots. We all have blind spots, and so often we deny when we are challenged. We deny. I remember this is a confession, that I was teaching at Newbold, and there was a white American student, a female.
That'd be me.
And she said, Dr. Brown, I think you're sexist.
Ouch.
I said, now, I can understand now when some whites are called racist, that the natural tendency is to say, no, I'm not. But she seemed to say that she had her hand up, to answer or to either ask a question or answer, and I maybe went to the gentleman. You see, now maybe I wasn't aware of that, but it was not for me to deny and to defend. It was to see this as an opportunity.
To grow.
Yeah, if that's how you felt, then that's genuine, And so it is for me to alter my conduct so that you are embraced and seen as equal. That's it. Don't spend your time denying it. Change.
Often it's just an unconscious bias. It's not. We could actually be in our minds something without actually understanding that our actions are showing something different. So I feel like we're kind of hopping all over the place here. Sorry. So So obviously I know that you come back to Newbold to teach, but I feel like there's some years in between that we missed. So you went to Newbold.
That's true.
So you became a pastor?
I went to Newbold, and just as I had wanted to have a year off during the social work, if I did social work, that is. So when I realized Newbold College had a student missionary program that you could take a year off, I said, oh, I like that. And so I applied to, there were two of us who applied, and there were two positions. One was in Egypt, and the other was in Nigeria. And the other gentleman, Humphrey, he was a Irishman, and he applied to go to Egypt. And he applied to go to Nigeria, and I applied to go to Egypt.
Okay.
The brethren, in their wisdom, said, Jeff will go to Nigeria, and Humphrey will go to Egypt. And so he went along to Egypt, but my visa process was delayed, and it looked as if I was not going to go. School started back at Newbold, and I was still there. But an opening came in Ashanti, Ghana. And they said, Jeff, would you like to go and teach in Ghana for a year? And I said, yes. And what a wonderful privilege that was. My conference president was Matthew Bidiako.
Okay.
And
so for those who are listening, I mean, obviously I know who he is because I lit up there for a second. But for people who don't know who he is, tell us how would we know him today?
Of course, Matthew Bidiako, he became the secretary of the World Church. He had, I think, the first African of the World Church. And so he had moved from that position as conference president. He later became division president in West Africa. And then he was called, of course, to the General Conference by Dr. Paulson. And so I had a wonderful year there. When I went there, they were calling me Pastor Brown, the students. But I had not determined yet that I was going to be pastor. I said, I'm not Pastor Brown, I'm Mr. Brown.
But you've been called parson by your uncles and pastor now by students.
Yes.
I feel like God has been trying to tell you something very firmly here.
I think he was, but I resisted it. And but one day in Ghana, the pastor of the church said, Jeff, we're having a camp meeting planning committee. The pastors, the district leaders, come along to this meeting. As you're teaching religion, at the school. So I went to the meeting, and I was surrounded, Alyssa, by these pastors passionately planning the work of the church. And I said to myself, this is the group that I want to be with. This, the buzz, the excitement, the leadership, the drive. I knew then that ministry was what I felt called to be and to do.
So if you had never gone on that year in mission, you might not be a pastor.
No. Well, we know
God could have figured out other avenues, but it was a
right.
pivotal moment for you.
It was a pivotal moment. And they do say things like student missionary years can be, life-changing experiences. And for me, it was. And yet, on the other hand, I did not really ever become a full-time missionary. I thought that
that's what you're going to do.
That's what I was going to do. I even went to Abidjan, is where the headquarters were of the division, and I said I'd like to be a missionary full-time. They said, well, you need to finish your degree, your undergraduate degree, and perhaps learn some French. And so I went on that pilgrimage. I went to Collonges in France.
Oh, you were very dedicated to this.
Yeah, I did. I did French, and then I finished my degree. I said, well, I'd like to be a missionary. They said, well, I see if you just get your MDiv. and then I got my MDiv.
Where did you go to Andrews for
I
your
went to
MDiv?
Andrews for the MDiv.
Now, had you been to America?
Well, I not only had not been to America, but I don't know if it's okay to say I didn't want to go to
It's
America.
okay.
And
I forgive you.
I was very British, and
As the lone American in this room, including our team,
yes,
it's okay.
yes. Well, it's so funny now because now, and you know, I've met and married a Bermudian, and I've pastored in Canada, and so many people say to me, Jeff, you're from England, you've got Jamaican roots, you've pastored in Canada, you've married a Bermudian, and you worked in Bermuda. Where are you going to retire? And I say, United States.
Oh, we get to keep you, though. We do get to keep you.
I'm just trying to quickly put that in when I said I didn't want to come here.
It's okay. We're going to keep you.
Yeah,
we welcome you with open arms, Jeffrey.
Its tentacles have gripped me. But no, so I had a friend at Newbold. He said, Jeff, let us go to Andrews to do our MDivs, because if we stay at Newbold, we will only have the same teachers again that we had for the undergrad. We need to be stretched. So let us go to Andrews. So
let's talk about the weather. How was that? Because I don't think England's quite on par with Andrews, is it?
The weather?
Yeah.
No, Andrews is what I would call black and white. That is to say, hot and cold. So
it's either hot or you're freezing.
Yes. Brittany's gray.
Okay, so
yeah,
just there.
Brittany's gray. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, almost every day here, when we wake up, Patty and I, we say, Google, what's the weather today? But in England, you didn't really ask.
You didn't need to.
What was the weather?
My daughter picked Andrews because it gets cold. She was like, I don't want to go to a school that's like super hot. Like she's like, she'd rather bundle up than be in a super hot environment. But yeah, I don't think I would ever pick a school because it's cold.
Yes.
Fortunately, she also loves Andrews University.
Yes.
So,
well, I loved it too. It was a great experience to be there. And it's interesting you mentioned about the cultures because there was a group at Andrews that really expanded my mind. And this was the group that came up from Oakwood University.
Okay.
And so for the first, although I'm black, but for the first time I met this, very energetic group of preachers who came from Andrews. They were fun-loving. They were loud, not all are loud, but they were loud.
It's true because the British culture is a much more reserved, quiet culture.
Yes.
And
but when I say loud, I would use the word joy. Mm-hmm. They had this exuberance and magnetism, about them, that when they would worship, it was alive, and even the word joy was not one that, as Brits, we associate with with just,
anything.
We
have gray weather. We have gray.
I played.
I'm kind of making fun of Brits now. Sorry.
I played football, or as we would say here, soccer, and so we do shout, there.
On the pitch, that's
the
it,
football
though.
matches, but certainly not in church. But they brought this joy and exuberance, and I was quite taken. I was quite impressed by it, and I would sometimes say when they came from preaching in Chicago for youth, I said, "How was church?" Because there was a lot of anticipation when you were going. How was church this weekend? And they would say to me, "Oh, we had a good time. And I was like, "What do you mean?
That's the weirdest reaction.
Good time? This is church. It's supposed to be solemn and serious and sober." And so my eyes were open to the the beauty and the joy of worship and being able to express our response. And of course, be silent was more the refrain in Britain, but it was not the refrain there.
It's learning that there's different ways to worship. And sometimes we think one's right, one's wrong. That's just for that culture.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, you know what? I can enjoy lots of different things.
Yes.
And we shouldn't ever say that this is the one right way.
Like that.
We shouldn't pigeonhole people based on their color or their ethnicity, anything as to what they will appreciate in worship.
That's beautiful.
I told you that I have interviewed Elder Mbwana, and we were talking about the beautiful experience I had in Tanzania. I loved worship in Africa. It literally, the word you just used, joy. Mm-hmm. I had not had a lot of joy in worship. Now, I come from the very small country kind of churches, so it wasn't this very formal kind of a thing, like this pomp and circumstance kind of thing. It was kind of like, hey, who can take up the offering, sometimes of thing. And there was this beautiful to that informality too, is this family feeling. And so there's just so many different ways to worship. And
I like that.
We need to stop trying to box everything in. God is not in a box. He created a universe, not a box.
No, he did. And we though I loved that worship, but there was a friend of ours, a Canadian, who said to us, you guys from England, you've got to do your ministerial assignments on a Sabbath. You've got to choose a church. And many of our African American friends, they were going to Chicago or South Bend, Indiana, and he said, there's a white church in this place called Holland, Michigan, and you guys from England, you never know when you go back to England where the president will assign you.
It might be a good fit.
Yeah, and so he said, why don't you go to this white church in Holland, Michigan?
Which is kind of a little bit of a role reversal from the church you were brought up in, where you had a white pastor and it was mostly Caribbean. True. And now you kind of are doing this reverse aspect.
That's true. And especially now I'm in the States, the land of these exciting churches. But we said, okay, well, we're open to that. And so we drove 2.5 hours to Holland, Michigan on a Sabbath to this Dutch community. And when we went in, there were 3 of us from England. When we went in, this one white lady whose name was Ellie Raab, R-A-A-B, and she looked at us and she said, I have 3 sons, but I've always wanted 6.
Oh, I love Ellie already, because I'm guessing that you were the other 3.
So you 3 will be my other 3 sons. He said, wow.
How precious.
He said, well, what does that mean? She said, well, it's a long way for you to travel. She said, if you want to, you can come on a Friday. You can stay at our house. Your Sabbath meal is assured. And you can go back Sabbath afternoon. Or if you want to stay over and go Sunday morning, you can. And so for 3 years. This was not a small commitment, or passing or fleeting commitment. And so I remember one of our 3, he met a young lady who was from at Andrews, but she's from Mississippi. And this white couple, drove down to Mississippi for the wedding of Theo and Lorraine. And then I'd met my wife, Patty Jean,
who is precious.
Very precious. And I met her at Andrews. And this couple flew to Bermuda.
No, they didn't.
For our wedding.
That's amazing. I love this story. What I'm loving is that this is the unity we talk about that we get in the church. For all the struggles, because let's be real, we know that there's struggles. We're not oblivious to this. But when we talk about the struggles, we have to remember that as a church, that's not the whole church.
No.
And that, not to minimize that, but we also need to hear these stories of people who just immediately just take each other under the wing and nurture and see really you as a son.
That's correct. That's great. It's not about the color. It's not about the outward appearance.
It's about family. And that's what a church is. At its core, the church is a family. And we
Yes.
are called to love each other without abandon.
Without abandon.
And that's what Ellie did for you.
She did. And John 13:1 says, having loved his own that were in the world, Jesus, he loved them unto the end. He loved his disciples unto the end. And her love for us was not just for 1 year or for 2 years. In fact, then we started our families, and she would send a check of $25, and she said she will send the child $25 until they are 30. Now, my son, he passed 30 recently, and he was very sad.
Sorry.
So
He was very sad. Come on, Ellie, he's sad.
And she said to him, "Oh, but Jamel, your wife, Sarai, isn't she, is she 28?" He said, "Yes." "Well, I can keep sending it then until." Yeah. So recently,
That's
last month, we were at Andrews for some meetings, and we drove to Holland, Michigan. And Fritz, her husband, he's passed away now, and Ellie's in a nursing home, in a home. And we went and visited her because she's family. And so
I kind of want to go to Holland, Michigan and meet this lovely Ellie. 'Cause it's just such a beautiful story of people. There's a lot of times in students' lives and whatever, you love your mom. It wasn't even that you had a bad relationship with your family. But there's these people who come in and they are not family by blood. They're family by choice. And they pour their lives into you.
They do.
And to your family often. And it's this beautiful picture of what the church is supposed to be.
Yes. And I should say that it was my dad's mother, Gran, that sowed those seeds into us, but she sowed it into her son, my father. And so just before I joined the church, he was the one who was now coming back. He was not in the Baptist church. He was in no church. But he came into the church and joined the church, and didn't work out too well with mom and dad, the religious differences, and they went their separate ways. By then we were all late teens, so I wouldn't say we were, people speak about scars or being negative. Obviously we were impacted, but the love for both of them, they didn't speak against each other negatively. And we had total love from them. And my father remarried a lovely person, even from the church. And when he retired, he relocated into Mandeville, Jamaica. And so that's where he lives now. But he's an elder in the church and a wonderful Seventh-day Adventist role model. So I had my dad as well as my grandmother in the church.
So you've been really fun to talk to, and I'm looking at a clock and I'm seeing it tick down. I'm like, I feel like we're gonna have to condense years of your life into moments, and I hate doing that. I had this problem with Zeno too. Such an interesting life, and it was like, okay, here's the last 20 years of your life in 2 minutes. We have more than 2 minutes. We're fine, but you go back to Newbold you get your MDiv. Do you also do your doctorate while you're at Andrews?
Yes.
Okay. So you go back because you're telling your friends, hey, we need somebody to be there. And then God's like, yep, that's you. So you go over, you start teaching at Newbold. What do you do after teaching at Newbold?
Well, just before I actually started to teach, I pastored in Manchester and Leeds. Our daughter was born in Leeds, Crystal, and our son Jamel, he was born in Manchester. And then we taught at Newbold, and after teaching there, I had a call to pastor in Toronto. And Canada is a beautiful, beautiful country. When I when we arrived and got off the plane, it was midnight, and the lady said, "Welcome to Canada." Now, some of the immigration people in the United States, I don't remember them ever saying to me, "Welcome to the United States."
I don't either.
But Canada said, "Welcome to Canada." And we had a wonderful time, and we really planned to remain there. But Dr. Delbert Baker called me to Oakwood. And I said, "Well, I'm not an Oakwoodite." I said, "Why should I come to Oakwood?"
What did he call you to do at Oakwood?
He said, "Well, you've taught pastoral care and counseling at Newbold College, and we want someone to teach that at Oakwood." And this was a new thought for me, but I went because it was a call. And when we got there and we stayed there, we fell in love with Oakwood. There's no place like Oakwood.
Oakwood and PUC, so Pacific Union College. They are the only Adventist colleges I have yet to visit.
Okay.
Okay. I was able to recently visit within America, obviously not the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to go to Oakwood. Some of the people, I've had friends who've gone there. I've just always heard such beautiful things about the school and the campus and the environment.
Yes.
What was it like coming from a Newbold kind of environment to an Oakwood? Because it's very different.
Very interesting. From a college where I was the first and only black teacher, especially in theology department, to Oakwood University. Now, Oakwood has quite a diverse staff. Many people don't know. There are many white teachers that were there at Oakwood. Quite diverse in that respect. And now there are many even Hispanic students that are studying there. So it's quite diverse. But it was a warm and welcoming place. One example would be Black History Month. I know in the country of the United States, it's something to be celebrated, but on certain campuses, sometimes there's a tightening of the muscles, a feeling of, oh no, Black History Month, what, or maybe are we going to be made to feel guilty, or, what is it that's going to be said?
There's all sorts of different feelings.
So being at Oakwood for Black History Month, which was largely black, it was just a celebration, music, culture, where God has brought us from. And so Oakwood was really a place of joy. And we were there for a little while, but then I was called to be president of the Bermuda Conference. I had never worked in Bermuda.
You've had quite the unique adventure. I mean, teaching and then back to pastoral and teaching.
I call them the CPs. I was a church pastor. I was a college professor. I was a conference president. And
you like CPs.
I'm a colored person too, but that's not a professional position. But certainly,
but I really like CPs.
But certainly, that's how the journey, God has put us on. But really, it's all to do with His glory.
Ooh, now you're a clergy's pastor.
Yes.
Because that's what Ministry Magazine is.
Yes.
Look, you still got this. I was going in my mind trying to find a C and a P for you there.
I'm a clergy's pastor and a Christian publisher as well.
Look at this. We're just going to stick with that.
We give all the glory to God.
So how long did you serve as a conference president?
I was there for 10 years as conference president. And
so I feel like you don't seem that old to me, but I feel like you've
you.
had a lot of years doing a lot of things.
We could probably end with that.
We could just end with that.
Okay.
Be like, and Jeffrey's young, everybody. Anyway, but it feels like you keep adding on. I kind of feel like your experience has to stop here somewhere. So you serve as the conference president for 10 years. Mm-hmm. Was it from here that you're called to the General Conference?
We have term limits in Bermuda.
Okay.
And so Dr. Les Pollard, he called me back to Oakwood from Bermuda. But then they had built an institute called the Bradford Cleveland Brooks Leadership Center, built under Dr. Delbert Baker. And they asked me to be the director, to take over from Dr. Harold Lee as the director of this center.
What does the center do?
And this center was to provide continuing education to pastors from the regional or the black conferences there in the United States, and so to develop their leadership, continuing education. And it was while I was doing that that the call came from the General Conference.
So you said Bradford, Cleveland, Brooks. So it'd be like Charles Bradford, E.E. Cleveland, and C.D. Brooks?
And C.D. Brooks.
Okay.
And Bradford represented church administration. E.E. Cleveland represented evangelism. And C.D. Brooks represented media. And so these three aspects we would infuse into the students or the pastors.
I love it. Those are great leaders of our time.
That's
and
great. Giants.
Giants would be an accurate term for them. And I wish there was a way for us to find more of their sermons, read their life stories and stuff. I actually heard C.D. Brooks preach at my school.
Okay.
He preached for one of our alumni weekends. And I still actually remember sentences from it. He was so powerful.
Yes,
and
that's correct.
Is brilliant man. All right, so why ministerial? Like what? I mean, you've been able to do this pastoral.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've been a pastor. You've been a conference president. What when they called you? Because I don't find most people come to the GC because they're like, oh, I want to go to the GC. It's like there's something about the call that feels personal. When God calls us, there's something to it that the Holy Spirit is resonating with our heart. What about your call resonated and made sense? Like, yeah, I'm ready to leave Oakwood in this beautiful position of being able to help train and pastors. What was that for you?
Well, the specific call was, as you mentioned, to be the associate editor of a ministry magazine, as well as you said, to serve the pastors globally. But my main task as the associate editor is to basically stay put, to stay at the wheel. Elder Dr. Derek Morris, he was the editor, and he had called me, and he said to me, Jeff, the magazine came out in 1928, and it has come out every month since 1928, including, he said, during the war.
Wow.
And so don't let the magazine fall on your watch. And so
no pressure. No pressure.
So my task was to make sure that it went out. And I remember speaking to Dr. Keith Burton, a British fellow at Newbold, a fellow teacher, and I said, Keith, what do you think of this call? And he said to me, wherever writing is involved, he said, that's where I'd like to be. And I realized, well, that is a joy and a passion, that I have. And I don't know if Derek really knew that, when he reached out to me. But when I was teaching at Newbold, the Stamber Press called me, our Adventist press in England, and said, Nancy Van Pelt, she's written these books on marriage and the family.
I remember reading
remember
them.
those
I do.
classic books? And To Have and to Hold. They said he's 25 years old. We need an update. And I thought, wow, yeah, you may need one, but why are you calling me? And so I had a sabbatical and wrote what became known as Total Marriage. And since then, we have been writing books. They said, please, could you write a book for the singles? And we wrote Single and Gifted. And then we wrote a parenting book. And finally, we wrote Love Seasons for those single, for those who are married. And writing has a great or wide influence, even after even after you pass away. And so the opportunity to influence lives through the written word was important to me. I had been a student colporteur. And
I was a student colporteur.
You were a student
7
colporteur?
years.
7 years.
I know, right?
That is awesome.
It's a long time.
Wow. Well, we did 5.
Oh,
and
I'm proud of you because that's a long time. So.
Yes, we did 5 in Holland, Europe. Holland, Europe.
Okay, not Holland, Michigan.
Not Holland, Michigan. In Aberdeen, Scotland, in Norway, and then we were in Alberta, Canada, and Toronto, Canada. So 5 summers we were, and now the colporteurs, even in other parts of the world, especially in Africa, they are selling our books. I said, look at that. We've come a sort of a full circle. So sometimes when I speak in Africa, they say, are you the one who wrote this book? But ministry and the ministerial department gives us that opportunity to fulfill that passion.
Jeffrey, I just want to say what a joy, because we've used that word a lot today. What a joy it has been to talk to you. And I feel like we've been able to talk about, one, your life story, but also about a lot of other things that impact us in our life journeys. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me. And I hope we get to have more conversations over mugs of water in the future. I know beforehand we talked about a specific topic that we need to talk about. So we're going to, because I introduced you to ChatGPT. I think I was the first one, right? Yep. So I'm going to continue to help expand your horizons with new things. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a joy to be here.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of A&N Profiles with my special guest, Jeffrey Brown. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast, YouTube channel, wherever it is you're tuning in from today. I don't want you to miss any future episodes. Thank you for spending this time with me. Join me next week as I continue to get to know the life stories of more inspiring people.